Hi, everybody. My name's Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm here today to talk to you about why we need more punk in your CX life. Now, before I start, I want to start with a story. I want to start with a story that features myself and a friend of mine, Oshin, sitting in a pub, drinking some Guinness, talking about the state of customer experience. And after a couple of pints, I blurted out this idea that I was frustrated with all the activity, but frustrated with the lack of kind of progress. So I blurted out, I wish somebody would do something a bit more punk. And I actually kind of thought about all that. And I thought about it from a perspective of like, the whole space. And I think there's a lot of talk and a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of activity and a lot of investment in the space. But I'm just frustrated by how much improvement we've actually made in terms of like customer outcomes and employee kind of outcomes. And many people share the frustration with me. In fact, actually, there's a lot of research that supports this idea that we're not making enough improvement, and that you might be familiar with this number. 70% comes from McKinsey, which says 70% of all big transformation, change, experience kind of projects fail to meet their objectives. And recent research actually another research sort of supports this kind of number. And my frustration with the whole experience space is that I think that customer experience is in danger of becoming, as it says on the slide, becoming overly complicated technical benchmark frameworks, measured, codified, certified, specialized, functionalized, et cetera, all that sort of like stuff. And actually, this is my frustration. Now I go back to the punk point. What I meant about the punk point was that if I think about punk, and I'm a fan of punk music, I think about where it came from, and punk exploded out of the back of progressive rock in the 1970s. Now, progressive rock, whilst it was popular, it was also got accused of being overly elaborate, more interested in itself, quite exclusive, and not really interested in kind of its fans. And punk exploded at the back of that with its DIY, democratic, anybody can have a go sort of approach. It's all kind of heart and emotion, not necessarily about your technical virtuosity. And it struck me that there's a potential parallel between that type of development of rock music and what's going on in customer experience, because it feels to me like if you think about some of the things that are going on right now in customer experiences, customer experience is potentially sharing the similar characteristics as prog rock did in the 1970s, that it's at danger of becoming overly complicated, technical, interested in its own virtuosity, as it were, and losing sight of its ultimate constituents, i.e. its customers. So if that's true, then that made me think, well, if that's true, if the experience space is sharing some of the same characteristics as prog rock did in the 1970s, then what would a punk version of customer experience look like? Now, I believe that actually, if you think about punk, what it does do is it dares to be different, to stand out, to be counterintuitive, to matter, to not be boring, all of these different sort of things, go against the grain, try new things, take risks, make mistakes, and not need to be liked by everyone. And that's what I think, but you don't actually have to take my word for this, because I asked a whole bunch of people, and I've been asking a whole bunch of people since the book came out in sort of summer of 2019, of what punk, I've taken a more punk approach to customer experience would mean to them. And I don't apologize for this slide because it's like, I guess, PowerPoint or presentation kind of suicide, but this is a list of, to date, 147 different words that people have used to describe what taking a punk approach to customer experience would mean to them. Now, if you look at some of this, if you pause the video, if you're watching this on demand and you look at some of these things and you look at all these different things, what you realize is that this punk approach is a really, really broad church. And in reality, taking a punk approach to customer experience is more of an attitude and a mindset. It's not a method. It's not scared to do things differently and flip things on the end. It's not the answer. I'm not saying, follow me, this is the way to go. That's up to you, ladies and gentlemen. That's up to you. You're the ones that need to do the work to produce those better outcomes. And I believe that taking some inspiration from punk music and a punk approach to music and a punk approach to all sorts of different things in life could be helpful in terms of harnessing creativity and pushing for those better outcomes. So much so that, I mean, I wrote a book about it. Punk CX came out, as I say, came out in 2019. But what I've done is I've created like an old school, not a playlist, that's very Spotify. I've created a mixtape for you, a mixtape from the book. And the first question I wanted to ask, and the first track in the book, as it were, is this one. This is a zoomed in version. What the track asks is this, I think, a fundamental question. It asks whether you're an artist or whether you're just coloring in. Because I think there's too many kind of people, too many organizations that are basically kind of following the paint by numbers approach, doing the same thing as everybody else, sort of expecting different results. But we know that thinking about it as children, we can paint by numbers. It doesn't create art. It might create a nice picture, but it doesn't create art. That is your challenge. Are you going to be good at painting by numbers, or do you want to create art? Do you want to do things kind of differently? Because it's up to you. As I said before, it's about you deciding to want to do better work. Now, the next thing I wanted to share with you is a poster that's on my wall, which is actually above my head. You can't see it on the camera sort of thing. It's over there, but it's actually this one on the screen. And it says, customer experience is more than effing metrics. I love this poster because I love kind of what it stands for and what it challenges, because too many times I hear people talking about customer experience and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is a CSAT score or an NPS score or a customer effort score or this, that, or the other. And I'm a bit like, hang on, it's more than that. It's much, much more than that. It's about outcomes, but creating those better kind of outcomes, those better experiences, a better service experience, all those different sort of things. We shouldn't be reductive in how we describe this. And there's organizations that truly, truly get this. There's one, for example, that I know of that I want is Coventry Building Society here in the UK. They're one of the consistently in the highest performing financial services organizations in the UK. And they have been for like the last decade or so, if not more. And they don't use any individual or team performance metrics. In fact, they do track their NPS, but not really actively. They are open to feedback from the customers. And they do measure how they're doing, but they don't use metrics to drive performance. And I think this is the key thing. What they do instead is to get really focused on what they do and also what they don't do. And they concentrate on doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And that focus, that way of being, that sort of behavior, as it were, is what drives them through to kind of achieve, such massive, performance kind of like differences between them and the competition. And I think it's really interesting because they're not defined by their metrics. They're defined about what they do and how they do it and why they do it. So like my poster says, customer experience is more than effing metrics. The next thing I want to say is that, because I see too many companies that are focused on, they get caught up in like the new technology, the new thing, new channels, new this, new that, new other. And it's sort of that customer evidence or evidence from customers just not listening. Customers are pretty straightforward. They want people to just do the simple things and do them well in the first instance. And there's too few companies that are brilliant at the basics. Not what you think the basics are, but what they think the basics are. And I think this is really important, not just because they're trying to simplify things. It's really important from a psychological perspective, because psychological research, neuroscientific research, shows that we value the avoidance of risk and uncertainty and disappointment and failure between 5 and 17 times more than any joy, surprise, or delight or new thing, as it were. Now, that's not to say that new things aren't great, but before we get distracted with new stuff, let's make sure that we figure out what the basics are and then figure out how to be brilliant at them. Now, related to that, that may mean that we may need to focus on being great at a few things rather than average at a lot. Like the guy on the screen, as if you remember going to see this sort of performance, say at a circus or a theater or whatever, is like you can only balance so many kind of plays before you start smashing things. What's interesting in most kind of like organizations is that excuse me, I can't get my teeth back in, channel proliferation can tend to dilute focus and resources, which can tend to undermine performance. If you look at some of the leaders in the space, they're not operating over a countless number of different channels. What they end up doing is they end up focusing on probably the number of channels that you can count on one hand. And guess what? They focus on being great at those rather than average at a whole spectrum of channels. And that requires choices. It requires them to make difficult choices and sometimes brave choices. Because we must be willing, if we want to achieve difference and to stand out from the crowd, we must be willing to go against the grain. That's sort of the essence of punk. Be willing to go against the grain, to take risks, to make mistakes, to learn, but to sort of focus and keep things simple. And I think the same is true for everything else. And in particular, it's true for the people that we hire, because if we're all looking in the same places for the same sort of people, we're not going to find the same things. And sometimes if we're searching for passionate, interesting, enthusiastic sort of people, we have to look in different places and at different people to find what we're looking for. I use this picture from, it was basically from people that were being at a Comic-Con event, because I use it to tell you a story about Wayfair, who were frustrated at not being able to find the right sort of people with the right amount of passion, the right sort of enthusiasm to help them deliver that outstanding service or that outstanding experience to their customers. So rather than going to local kind of job fairs or using local job boards, they made an assumption. They said, if we want passionate people, then we need to go to where we know there are passionate people, on the assumption that passion was a transferable skill. So what they did is they ended up taking a stall at a local Comic-Con in San Diego, with the idea that if we can go and talk to people that are passionate about comic books and all the characters and storylines in comic books, we talked about the work that they do and show that we're interested in them and interested in the skills, then actually we might find some really interesting and passionate, enthusiastic people that might want to come and work for us. They did it, and it was an absolute roaring success. So the lesson here is we sometimes have to think about everything in our business and everything that we do and how that kind of impact our overall experience. We have to look for difference and advantage and creativity and how we approach things to try and achieve that difference. And finally, we need to ask ourselves a fundamental question. And we need to be really honest when we answer it. And the question is, do you dare to be different? I mean, do you really dare to be different? Because if you don't, then stop talking about it and just do ordinary stuff. But if you do want to be different, then be prepared to do what it takes to be different, to take those risks, to do something different. Take, for example, this picture is from the Morioka bookstore in the Ginza district of Tokyo. Now they, in a really competitive market, selling books that is, they've gone completely out on a limb, done something completely different. So rather than trying to sell a lot of books, they decided all they do is they sell one book per week. And what they do is they focus on it and they try and create conversation and community and events and activities around that book. So it allows to create this immersive experience around that book. It's been going for a number of years now. It's still successful, but that shows you sort of the bounds of difference that you can go to. And what daring to be different could really kind of mean. So then I come back to my kind of like my original question. So are you an artist? Or do you want to be an artist? Or are you just kind of happy just to continue coloring in? The question's up to you. We all, as customers and people that work for these organizations that want to produce better outcomes, we're waiting for you to step up and to make that difference. My second and very, very final question is, so who's ready to embrace their inner punk? That's all for me today. Thank you.